An African-American folk saying claims that our God can make a way out of no way. Noah, Abraham and Sarah, Joseph, and Moses each persevered with God's help amidst almost unimaginable darkness. Through the narratives of these biblical archetypes, we come to experience our own stories in a more hopeful way than we may ever have imagined. This is a series for those times in your life where there seems to be no way out, and for the times when God shines a light in the darkness, providing that way after all. Abraham and Sarah are called, they're given an identity in relation to God. They're called by a love that exceeds their wildest imaginations to conceive, and they are acting in relationship to this one whose love for them is just mind-numbing, and trust in them, believe it or not, is mind-numbing. And in chasing out that relationship between themselves and God, that becomes the blessing. It's an attractional blessing, not simply one that we cast off and impart to others. It's like a good analogy would be with a relationship. Take two people who are in love and they get married and they are thoroughly in love. Their marriage itself creates a blessing for others just through them interacting in a loving way. It creates a blessing for the world. They don't necessarily have to sit down and say, okay, now how do we bless the world through,
Right.
what do we give them? It's like be you in love with each other, and through whom the world gets blessed.
I think that's exactly right. That's what's going on with Abraham and Sarah. When you see them accepting this blessing and not being afraid of what God has called them to do, but living into that identity, that's when you see them becoming a blessing to others. When they get a little anxious, then things start to veer off the path. That's the way it is, though, right, for everybody. That's what's great about Abraham. He's often depicted as, the faith of Abraham, as though it were just this, platonic ideal of faith. But when you really read the narratives, no, he's actually somebody who stumbles a few times and is really human, which is wonderful about him and wonderful about actually all the biblical characters.
Yeah.
None of them are ever flawless.
There's an earthiness to the Hebrew Scriptures. They don't sugarcoat life, and the life that's reflected in the Old Testament looks a lot like the life I see in our lives. It's messy, it's really messy, it's dirty, and there are no pure heroes in the Old Testament. Well, I don't know any pure heroes in everyday life either. So to try to then wrestle with kind of the Old Testament thrusts you into the heart of a storm, in a sense, a human storm, and helps you develop eyes to see the grace and the love within the storm, and specifically within the storm, so that, like in your everyday life, when you find chaos, you're not so freaked out by it. It's like, oh no, I've seen this before, I found a way where there was no way.
Joseph knew God to be a way maker. That's African Americans would know that phrase. God is a way maker, right? Joseph knew God as a way maker because he remembered his experience of being delivered from the pit. So now he's in jail, another pit, vis-a-vis the stripping away of his identity, the clothes and all, and yet he could have the presence of mind and faith to remain calm. God did it for me yesterday, so my yesterday is informed by my today, and in fact can now inform my tomorrow. I can vision a new day. God of my weary years, God of our silent tears, from the Negro spiritual hymn, Lift Every Voice and Sing. God who has brought us thus far on our way. That if God delivered me yesterday, certainly God can and will deliver me right now. And whatever I may go through, my prosperity is hooked to the promise that God has made to me, that my tomorrow will be taken care of just like my today and yesterday.
There are a couple of things that we have to make spiritual practices. One is silence and one is solitude. And those are two things we don't do very well in our culture anymore. So if we feel a little bit lonely, we check Twitter or Facebook or send it out an email or whatever. I stand in line at a Chipotle at lunch and I look and every single head in front of me is is bowed down to the altar of the iPhone, and I'm just as guilty as everybody else. But I think sometimes we complain or we bemoan the fact that God doesn't speak to us, and yet we immerse ourselves in this constant white noise. And how could a still small voice cut through all that chatter? And also just knowing how to be alone, to be still, and to be okay with that sometimes makes room for things to happen that if we're in a constant state of distraction, we can never really connect with.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And I think that, when you think about that, going back to that story, that's a pretty grand occurrence, a pretty life or death situation. But I think that, we get practice before we get the parting of the Red Sea. We get the bathtub. We get the little partings. In a sense, those day-to-day kind of decisions. Do we go this way or this way? Do I respond to this intuition that says I should talk to this person or pick up the phone or what have you, or not? These small decisions that are made on a constant everyday basis that kind of lead us into then and give us the strength and the practice to make those big decisions when things maybe have higher stakes.
And that narrative lectionary that we've been following has been talking exactly to that point, right? That there is a maturation of faith in the midst of our conversation, our ongoing conversation with God. And that as we live through these experiences one day at a time, we gain a level of experience that trust in God builds. And we can trust God, and maybe God can trust us. And it's still a risk, but our trust is much stronger.
Yeah, that unbelievably doesn't require our perfection.
Right.
It simply calls forth our love. And we start to respond in love, and we get that attachment that's necessary to keep coming back over and over again, keep turning it over, keep practicing.
Fail fast, fail often.
Absolutely.
But keep trying.
Absolutely, yeah.
Grace walks in covenant with gratitude. Grace looks to have a gratitude response or a responsibility, because being in covenant with God is a two-way street, It is both privilege and struggle. And I see that all the time in my own community. And I've sort of come to believe that a covenant response of faithfulness and righteousness and justice and responsibility comes with time and maturity. So that's where the struggle is. The love of God, the grace of God holds people in this process, kind of like parents who have ungrateful children,
Yeah.
You hope that one day they'll turn around and they'll understand and they'll grow up and they'll have fidelity, and a positive response because of the covenant of your love. But it's a risky business.
Truly.
It's a risky business because the genuine potential of a loving covenant relationship is worth the risk. And I think about God's love that way, but it is a risky business.
Through the darkest